Have you ever felt that certain days carry a special energy, a divine invitation that most people simply walk past without noticing? Have you noticed how some saints seem to whisper secrets that could change everything about how we approach our faith? Dear brothers and sisters, August 11th is not an ordinary day. It's the feast day of St. Clare of Assisi, the brave woman who left everything behind to follow Christ in absolute poverty and discovered 3 spiritual secrets that Padre Pio himself practiced throughout his entire life. You see, most people think St. Clare was just another nun who lived centuries ago, but Padre Pio knew something different. He understood that Clare wasn't just a saint from the past. She was a teacher whose lessons are desperately needed today. In fact, Padre Pio followed 3 specific practices that St. Clare pioneered, and he believed these 3 things should be done by every faithful soul on her feast day. But here's what troubles me. In our busy world, we've forgotten the profound wisdom that flows from St. Clare through Padre Pio to us. We treat saints' feast days like calendar reminders instead of spiritual doorways. We miss the treasures hidden in plain sight. Today, I'm going to share with you the 3 things that Padre Pio said we must do on St. Clare's Day. These aren't just religious obligations or empty rituals. These are pathways to transformation that have been tested by 2 of the most powerful saints in church history. If you believe in the intercession of St. Clare and trust in Padre Pio's wisdom, write in the comments, "St. Clare, help me find true freedom." Your words matter, and they help this message reach others who desperately need to hear it. But I need to warn you about something. What I'm about to reveal might challenge everything you think you know about spiritual life. Padre Pio didn't just admire St. Clare from a distance. He lived her teaching so deeply that people said he embodied her spirit in a male Franciscan's habit. The first thing Padre Pio insisted we do on St. Clare's Day will surprise you. It's not what most Catholics expect, and it's certainly not what the world teaches us about success and happiness. Yet this single practice has the power to break chains that have held you captive for years. Are you ready to discover what Padre Pio learned from the woman who stared down armies and moved the Pope herself to change church law? Because once you understand these 3 secrets, August 11th will never be just another day on your calendar again. Picture this. An 18-year-old girl from one of the wealthiest families in Assisi sneaks out of her father's house in the middle of the night. She runs through dark streets, her heart pounding, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back. When she reaches the small chapel where Francis of Assisi is waiting, she does something that shocks everyone present. She asks him to cut off all her beautiful blonde hair. This wasn't just a dramatic gesture. Clare understood something that most of us miss completely. She knew that true freedom begins with letting go of everything the world tells us we need to be happy. Padre Pio called this the fast of humility, and he insisted it was the first thing every person should practice on St. Clare's Day. But this isn't about going without food for a day. This is about something much deeper and more challenging. The fast of humility means deliberately choosing to let go of something that feeds your ego, your status, or your sense of being better than others. Padre Pio would often tell people, "You cannot serve God and your pride at the same time. One must die for the other to live." Think about Clare for a moment. She had everything: beauty, wealth, social position, marriage prospects that would secure her future. Yet she saw through all of it. She recognized these things as beautiful prison bars that would keep her from experiencing the freedom that comes with complete trust in God. Padre Pio lived this lesson every single day. Despite receiving miraculous gifts and having thousands of people seek his guidance, he would often say, "I am nothing but a poor friar who prays." When reporters called him a miracle worker, he'd redirect the attention to Christ. When wealthy benefactors offered him luxuries, he'd accept only what was absolutely necessary. But how do we practice this fast of humility today? It's not about throwing away everything you own or living in poverty. It's about identifying what you're secretly proud of and choosing to hold it more lightly. Maybe you're proud of your education, your job title, your social media following, or even your spiritual practices. The fast of humility asks you to spend one day treating these things as gifts rather than achievements. Instead of mentioning your accomplishments in conversations, listen more deeply to others. Instead of checking how many likes your posts received, spend that time in quiet prayer. Here's what Padre Pio discovered about this practice. When you fast from your pride, even for one day, something remarkable happens. The space that was filled with self-concern becomes available for God to work. You start noticing needs around you that were invisible before. You become more patient with difficult people because you're not constantly defending your image. Clare experienced this transformation so powerfully that she influenced popes and kings, not through political maneuvering, but through the pure authority that comes from someone who has nothing left to protect except love itself. I remember reading about a businessman who decided to practice this fast of humility on St. Clare's Day. Instead of talking about his recent promotion during a family gathering, he spent the evening asking his relatives about their dreams and struggles. By the end of the night, his teenage nephew, who had been distant for months, opened up about bullying at school. That conversation changed their relationship forever. This is the power Clare discovered and Padre Pio practiced daily. When we fast from our need to be impressive, we become truly influential. When we stop trying to prove we're worthy of love, we become capable of giving it freely. But there's something even deeper happening here, something that connects directly to why Padre Pio considered this so essential for St. Clare's Day. Clare didn't just practice humility. She discovered that humility is the secret entrance to a kind of prayer most Christians never experience, and that brings us to something extraordinary. Many people think they know how to pray, but Padre Pio learned from St. Clare that there's a way of praying that goes beyond words, beyond requests, beyond everything we normally think prayer should be. Speaking of prayer, I want to share something special with you. Just like St. Clare found strength in deep contemplation, Padre Pio discovered that the rosary was his most powerful spiritual weapon. He once said, "The rosary is the weapon for these times." Many people in our community have been asking how to deepen their prayer life and experience the same spiritual power that Padre Pio possessed. That's why we created something that can truly strengthen your faith journey. Our ebook, The Power of the Rosary with Padre Pio, Miracles, Protection and Divine Graces, will help you learn to pray the Rosary with greater devotion and depth, discover the miracles and testimonies of those who have experienced its power, understand Padre Pio's most impactful teachings about prayer, receive a 30-day prayer guide with daily intentions to strengthen your faith, and access special prayers for protection, healing, and liberation. The Rosary was Padre Pio's greatest weapon, and today it can be yours too. Don't miss this opportunity to strengthen your spiritual life with material that has already helped thousands of people. To download, just click the link pinned in the comments. Now, let's return to what Padre Pio learned from St. Clare about the second thing we must do on her feast day. There's a story about St. Clare that most people have never heard, but it reveals the secret that made her one of the most powerful intercessors in church history. During the siege of Assisi, when enemy soldiers were literally breaking down the convent walls, Clare did something that seemed almost reckless. While everyone else was screaming and running, she walked calmly to the chapel. She knelt before the Blessed Sacrament and simply waited, not asking, not pleading, not bargaining with God, just being present with Him in complete silence. The soldiers, who had been shouting and breaking everything in their path, suddenly became confused. They couldn't find the entrance they had just been using. They wandered around the convent walls as if they were lost in a maze, and eventually they simply left. The entire community was saved, not through weapons or walls, but through Clare's deep, silent communion with Christ. Padre Pio understood this power intimately. He called it contemplative prayer, and he insisted it was the second essential practice for St. Clare's Day. But here's what most people don't realize about contemplative prayer. It's not about emptying your mind or achieving some mystical state. It's about learning to be comfortable with God's presence when you have nothing to say. Think about it this way. In your closest human relationships, the most intimate moments aren't filled with constant talking. They're the comfortable silences. The moments when you're simply glad to be in the same room with someone you love. Contemplative prayer is learning to have those moments with God. Padre Pio would spend hours in this kind of prayer. People would see him kneeling in the chapel, completely still, and wonder what he was doing. He wasn't reciting prayers or reading scriptures. He was practicing what St. Clare had mastered, the art of resting in God's presence without needing anything from Him. Prayer is the best weapon we have, Padre Pio would say. It is the key to God's heart, but the most powerful prayer is often the quietest one. Here's how to practice contemplative prayer on St. Clare's Day, following the method that both she and Padre Pio used. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed for at least 15 minutes. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and simply acknowledge that God is present with you. Don't ask for anything. Don't try to solve any problems. Just be aware that you are not alone. When thoughts come into your mind, and they will, don't fight them. Simply notice them and let them pass like clouds across the sky. If you find yourself starting to worry about something or plan your day, gently bring your attention back to the simple truth. God is here with me right now. What usually happens next surprises most people. At first, you might feel restless or bored. You might think this kind of prayer is a waste of time because you're not getting anything done. But if you persist, something remarkable begins to occur. You start to sense a presence that was always there, but that you had been too busy to notice. It's not dramatic or overwhelming. It's more like recognizing that someone has been sitting quietly beside you all along, waiting for you to acknowledge them. This is what St. Clare discovered during that siege. When external chaos was at its peak, she found perfect peace in God's presence, and from that place of peace, she was able to intercede with supernatural power. Padre Pio experienced this same phenomenon. Even when hundreds of people were waiting to see him, even when he was suffering from his stigmata, he carried this inner stillness with him. People said that just being near him made them feel calm, as if his peaceful communion with God was contagious. But here's the secret that both Clare and Padre Pio knew. Contemplative prayer doesn't just bring you peace. It makes you incredibly sensitive to the needs of others. When you spend time simply being with God, you start to see the world through His eyes. You notice the lonely person sitting alone at church. You feel drawn to call a friend who's going through a difficult time. You become an instrument of God's love without even trying. I once met a woman who started practicing contemplative prayer after learning about St. Clare's method. She told me that after just a few weeks, her teenage daughter said, "Mom, you've become such a good listener. I feel like you actually hear me now." The mother hadn't changed her parenting techniques or read any books about communication. She had simply learned to be present with God, and that presence had overflowed into her relationships. This is the second thing Padre Pio insisted we must do on St. Clare's Day. Not because it's a religious duty, but because it connects us to the source of all genuine love and wisdom. But there's still one more thing, and this third practice is perhaps the most challenging of all. It's the one that both Clare and Padre Pio said would reveal whether our prayer life is genuine or just spiritual self-indulgence. Here's something that might shock you about St. Clare of Assisi. Despite living in strict enclosure, never leaving her convent walls after joining the Poor Clares, she somehow managed to feed thousands of hungry people throughout her lifetime. How is that possible? How could a cloistered nun who owned nothing and went nowhere become one of history's most effective servants of the poor? The answer reveals the third thing that Padre Pio said we must do on St. Clare's Day, and it's going to challenge everything you think you know about serving others. Clare understood that genuine service begins not with grand gestures or organized charity events, but with a heart that has been broken open by love. She discovered that when you truly encounter God in prayer, you cannot help but see His face in every person who suffers. From behind her convent walls, Clare would organize the collection and distribution of food to the poor. She would send her sisters out with specific instructions about which families needed help. She somehow knew about pregnancies, illnesses, and financial crises happening throughout the city, even though she never left the monastery. People started calling it miraculous, but Clare knew it was simply the natural result of contemplative prayer. When you spend time in God's presence, He shows you where love is needed most urgently. Padre Pio lived this same principle throughout his entire ministry. Despite his fame and the crowds that came to see him, he never forgot that authentic spirituality must express itself in practical care for others. He once said, "Prayer is talking to God. Service is letting God talk through you." But here's what makes this third practice so challenging in our modern world. We live in a culture that has turned service into a performance. We volunteer at soup kitchens and post photos on social media. We give to charity and expect tax deductions. We help others and secretly hope they'll remember our kindness. St. Clare and Padre Pio practiced a completely different kind of service. They served in ways that brought them no recognition, no credit, and often no thanks. They understood that the moment service becomes about your reputation or feelings, it stops being true service and becomes spiritual pride disguised as charity. On St. Clare's Day, Padre Pio insisted we must practice what he called invisible service. This means looking for ways to help others that no one will ever know about. It means serving people who cannot possibly repay you or even thank you properly. Let me give you some concrete examples of invisible service that you can practice today. Pay for the groceries of the person behind you in line, but leave before they find out who did it. Send an anonymous note of encouragement to someone who's going through a difficult time. Clean up a mess that someone else made without mentioning it to anyone. But invisible service goes deeper than random acts of kindness. It means looking for the people in your life who are consistently overlooked or taken for granted. The janitor at your workplace who no one acknowledges. The elderly neighbor who rarely has visitors. The family member who always listens to everyone else's problems but never shares their own. Padre Pio had an extraordinary ability to notice these invisible people. Visitors would later discover that while they were confessing their sins to him, he had also been mentally noting the needs of the person waiting behind them, the anxiety of the mother in the corner, the loneliness of the man who came every day but never spoke to anyone. Here's what happened to a man who decided to practice invisible service on St. Clare's Day. He noticed that his elderly father-in-law always seemed to struggle with technology, but was too proud to ask for help. Instead of offering assistance, which might embarrass the older man, he started accidentally stopping by whenever his father-in-law was trying to use his computer or phone. He would casually mention that he was having trouble with the same technology and ask if they could figure it out together. This allowed his father-in-law to maintain his dignity while getting the help he needed. Their relationship, which had been polite but distant for years, began to deepen into genuine friendship. This is the secret that both Clare and Padre Pio discovered about service. The most powerful acts of love are often the ones that allow others to maintain their dignity while receiving what they need. It's about serving in ways that make people feel seen and valued, rather than pitied or indebted. But there's something even more profound happening when we practice invisible service. We start to understand that we're not the heroes of these stories. We're simply instruments that God uses to care for His children. The focus shifts from our generosity to His love working through us. Padre Pio would often tell people, "You don't own your kindness. You're just the delivery system for God's mercy." When we serve invisibly, we remember this truth. We stop keeping score of our good deeds and start paying attention to how God wants to love others through our hands and hearts. This is why Saint Clare, despite never leaving her convent, became known throughout the region as a powerful advocate for the poor. This is why Padre Pio, despite his own physical suffering, never turned away anyone who needed help. Now you understand the three sacred practices that Padre Pio learned from Saint Clare of Assisi: the fast of humility that breaks the chains of pride, the contemplative prayer that opens your heart to God's presence, the invisible service that transforms you into an instrument of divine love. But here's what I want you to understand about these three things. They're not separate practices that you do once a year on St. Clare's Day. They're invitations to a completely different way of living. When you embrace the fast of humility, contemplative prayer, and invisible service, you step into the same spiritual freedom that both Clare and Padre Pio experienced. Think about it. Clare gave up everything the world told her she needed to be happy, yet she became one of the most joyful and influential women in history. Padre Pio endured incredible physical suffering, yet people traveled from around the world just to be in his presence because he radiated such peace and love. What they discovered is what you can discover too. True happiness doesn't come from accumulating things or achievements or recognition. It comes from aligning your life so completely with God's love that every day becomes an opportunity to experience and share that love with others. This is the secret that August 11th holds for you. It's not just about honoring St. Clare or following Padre Pio's advice. It's about accepting an invitation to step into the life you were actually created to live. But I need to be honest with you about something. These three practices will change you in ways you might not expect. When you fast from pride, you'll discover how much energy you've been wasting on trying to impress people who weren't really paying attention anyway. When you learn contemplative prayer, you'll realize how much anxiety comes from trying to control things that were never yours to control in the first place. When you serve others invisibly, you'll understand that your greatest joy comes not from what you receive, but from what you give. Padre Pio once said, "The life of a Christian is nothing but a perpetual struggle against self-love." But what he meant wasn't that you should hate yourself or think you're worthless. He meant that when you stop making everything about yourself, you discover a love so vast and beautiful that your old concerns seem tiny by comparison. St. Clare experienced this transformation when she was just 18 years old. She traded a life of comfort and security for a life of uncertainty and simplicity, and she never regretted it for a single day. Why? because she discovered that when you belong completely to God, you become free in ways that people who belong to the world can never understand. This is what awaits you when you practice these three things that Padre Pio learned from St. Clare. Not just on August 11th, but whenever you're brave enough to choose love over fear, service over selfishness, and trust over control. If these teachings have touched your heart and helped you see St. Clare's Day in a new light, I want you to write "Thank you" in the comments below. Your gratitude helps this message reach other people who need to hear about the wisdom of St. Clare and Padre Pio. When you take a moment to express thankfulness, you're participating in the same spirit of humility and service that these great saints embodied. And please, don't let this message stay with you alone. Share this video with someone who needs to discover the three sacred practices that can transform their spiritual life. Subscribe to our channel and become part of a community that's committed to living these timeless truths in our modern world. Remember, August 11th comes only once a year, but the invitation to live like St. Clare and Padre Pio is extended to you every single day. The question is not whether God is calling you to this deeper life. The question is whether you're ready to answer that call with the same courage that led an 18-year-old girl to change the world.